I remember the exact moment everything I thought I knew about my family stopped being true. It was a Friday afternoon in February, and I was standing in my own kitchen, the same kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals, the same kitchen where my son Daniel learned to make scrambled eggs at age 7, and I was holding a document I was never supposed to find. My hands were shaking, not because of the cold, because of what I was reading. There were 3 names on that contract. One was a company I had never heard of, one was my daughter-in-law's name, Cassandra, and the third one was my son's. And beneath those names, there was a date that was 6 months before Daniel sat me down at this very kitchen table and told me, with tears in his eyes, that it was time for me to get the care I deserved. 6 months before that conversation that broke my heart. This contract already existed, which meant that conversation had never been about care at all. I want you to stay with me through every minute of this story, because what I discovered goes so much deeper than a nursing home. What I uncovered was a scheme that had been running quietly in the background of my life for nearly 3 years, and it would have taken absolutely everything from me if I hadn't found that one piece of paper on a random Friday afternoon. And I almost didn't find it. That's the part that still keeps me up at night sometimes. Before I go any further, if you've ever had your trust broken by someone in your own family, or if you know someone who has, I want you to hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. And if you're new here, please subscribe. What I'm about to share took a long time to be ready to talk about. I'd love for you to be here for all of it. I spent 31 years as an elementary school librarian in a quiet suburb just outside of Columbus, Ohio. I'm not a wealthy woman by most people's standards, but I own my home. A 4-bedroom colonial that my late husband Gerald and I bought in 1987 for $84,000. By the time Gerald passed, 9 years ago now, the house had been appraised at just under $400,000, and in the last few years, with the way the real estate market moved, I'd been told it was worth closer to $650,000. I want you to hold on to that number. It matters more than you might think right now. Gerald left me with a modest life insurance payout and a small pension from 30 years of teaching, enough that I wasn't struggling, not enough that I wasn't paying attention to every dollar. I kept working part-time at the library until I was 65. I liked the routine. I liked feeling useful. I liked the kids. Daniel is my only child. He's 41 now. Growing up, he was the kind of boy who left handwritten notes under my pillow if he thought I was having a hard week. Just little things. "You're doing great, Mom," or "I love you, don't forget." I still have a few of them in a shoebox in my closet. That tells you everything you need to know about who I believed him to be. He met Cassandra at a work conference in Atlanta when he was 34. He called me the day after he met her, which I always thought was a good sign. He sounded like himself, excited, but measured. "She's really sharp, Mom, like genuinely sharp." I met her 3 months later at a restaurant downtown. She was attractive, well-dressed. She had this practiced warmth about her, the kind that makes you feel seen without knowing exactly why. She asked about my years at the library. She seemed genuinely curious. She asked follow-up questions. Looking back now, I understand what she was doing. She was gathering information, but at the time, I just thought she was thoughtful. I told Daniel as much on the drive home. They were engaged within the year. The wedding was simple, which surprised me. Cassie had expensive taste in almost everything else. The car, the clothes, the vacations she and Daniel took every year. But the wedding was understated, almost deliberately so. I later understood why she hadn't wanted to spend the money on a celebration. She was far more interested in building equity. The first year of their marriage, everything felt genuinely fine. Daniel and Cassie bought a house about 20 minutes from mine, close enough for Sunday dinners, far enough for privacy. We fell into a comfortable rhythm. They'd come over most Sundays. Sometimes I'd watch their dog when they traveled. Cassie would bring wine and ask about my week. I won't pretend there were no early signs. There were small things, a comment here, a look there, the kind of things your gut notices before your brain catches up. The first moment I remember clearly happened about 8 months into their marriage. I'd called Daniel on a Thursday evening and he didn't pick up. That was unusual, he almost always answered. He called back the next morning, apologized, said he'd been exhausted and fallen asleep early. But that weekend, Cassie mentioned in passing that they'd been out to dinner Thursday evening. She said it casually, in the middle of talking about something else entirely, and she moved right past it. I told myself a dozen explanations. Maybe Daniel had come home and gone straight to bed. Maybe she was remembering wrong. Maybe I was being paranoid. I should have written it down. Everything changed the spring of year 2 of their marriage. Not all at once. That's not how these things work. It happened gradually, the way a slow leak behind a wall works. You don't see the damage until the water is already running through the floor. Daniel started calling less. I noticed, but I didn't say anything right away. He was building his career in project management. He and Cassie were talking about starting a family. People get busy, I understood that. But then the Sunday dinners started getting canceled. One week it was a work obligation. Another week, Cassie had a migraine. A third week, they had plans with friends. Friends whose names seemed to change every time they came up in conversation. Around the same time, Cassie started saying things, small things, at first. She mentioned that I seemed tired lately. Had I talked to my doctor? She brought it up twice, in 2 separate conversations, both times in a tone so gentle and concerned that I actually appreciated it. I thought she was being caring. Then she started bringing up the house, not directly. She'd say things like, "This place must be so much to manage on your own, Ruth," or, "Have you ever thought about what you want to do with all this space?" I told her I was fine. That I liked my house, that this was my home. She always nodded and smiled when I said that. That smile started bothering me before I could explain why. The moment that truly cracked things open came on a Sunday in April. I had baked a pie and decided to drive over and surprise Daniel and Cassie, which I almost never did. But I was feeling good and I wanted to see them. I rang the doorbell, and after a long moment, Cassie answered. She was clearly not expecting me. Maybe uncomfortable is a better word. She let me in, but the whole visit felt off. Daniel came downstairs looking flustered. We sat in the kitchen and made small talk, but it had the energy of an interruption. There was a laptop open on the counter that Cassie closed before I could see what was on the screen. Not casually, deliberately. I stayed maybe 40 minutes. When I left, I sat in my car in their driveway and didn't move for a long moment before starting the engine. I didn't know what I had walked into, but something told me I had walked into something. The call came in June. Daniel asked if he could come over alone, without Cassie. That alone stopped me cold. They went everywhere together. It had been at least a year since he had visited by himself. He arrived looking like he hadn't slept well in days. Dark circles. A heaviness in his shoulders I hadn't seen since his father's funeral. We sat at the kitchen table and he said, "Mom, I want to talk to you about something important." He talked around it for a few minutes. He mentioned he'd been thinking about me, about how big the house was, about what would happen if something ever went wrong. He used phrases like, "just being responsible," and "long-term planning." And then he said it. "Cassie and I think it might be time to look into some options for your care." I want to tell you I responded calmly. I want to say I asked the right questions, but the truth is I went very still. Because I knew what options for your care meant. I had watched my own mother go through it. I understood how those conversations started. I asked him directly, "Are you talking about a nursing home, Daniel?" He looked down at his hands. He said something about continuing care communities and how they weren't like nursing homes used to be. He mentioned peace of mind. I told him I was 68 years old. I had no diagnosis. I cooked my own meals. I drove my own car. I paid my own bills. I was not in decline. He said, "I know that, Mom, but it's about planning ahead." I asked him whose idea this was. He hesitated just a fraction of a second too long. That hesitation, I've replayed it hundreds of times. Then he said, "We talked about it together." I believed him, because I wanted to. I thought it was misguided concern. I thought Cassie had planted an idea, and Daniel, being Daniel, had taken it seriously out of love. I thought that was the whole story. It wasn't even close to the whole story. After Daniel left that day, I called my oldest friend Patricia. She'd known Daniel since he was in diapers. 35 years of friendship between us. I told her everything that had been said. Her reaction surprised me. She didn't say, "He means well." She didn't say, "Maybe they just care about you." She said, "Ruth, what does this benefit her?" I told her I wasn't sure what she meant. She said, "Think about it practically. If you move into a facility, what happens to your house?" I hadn't thought about it that way. I had been seeing it emotionally, as a son who was changing, as a daughter-in-law with too much influence. I hadn't been thinking about it as a transaction. But Patricia was asking a different kind of question entirely. What happens to my house? I didn't know the answer, and not knowing it began to feel dangerous. About 3 weeks after that conversation, a brochure appeared in my mailbox. No return address, just a glossy, full-color brochure for a place called Hearthstone Continuing Care, with a small handwritten sticky note on the front that read, "Just thought you'd like to know your options. See. Cassie." I almost threw it in the recycling, but something made me set it on the kitchen counter, and that evening I sat down and actually read it. Hearthstone Continuing Care was located 45 minutes from my home. It was a private facility. Monthly costs ranged from $6,000 to $11,000 depending on level of care. The brochure mentioned something called asset-based payment arrangements, which I had to look up online. It meant they could bill against your estate, your house, your savings accounts, your investment portfolio, once your monthly income ran out. At $6,000 to $11,000 a month, I would exhaust my cash savings in under 3 years. After that, the house would be next. And that was the moment I stopped seeing this as a family concern. Patricia's son-in-law Marcus was a real estate attorney. He handled mostly commercial work, but he understood contracts and property law in ways I didn't. I asked Patricia if Marcus would sit down with me informally, just to help me understand some things. She called him that same evening. Marcus came over on a Saturday morning with coffee and a yellow legal pad. I laid out everything: the nursing home conversation, the brochure, Cassie's comments about the house over the past year, the way Daniel had started to seem like a different person. When I finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Ruth, have you signed anything recently? Power of attorney, health directive, any kind of estate document?" Something shifted in my stomach. About 3 months earlier, Daniel had brought over a small stack of papers. He said they were routine estate planning documents, a healthcare proxy, an updated will, general power of attorney paperwork. He said a financial advisor had recommended updating everything, and that Cassie had helped put it together. He called it standard. He sat across from me at this table and talked me through each page. I had signed all of it. I had barely read a word of it, because Daniel was handing it to me, and I trusted Daniel completely. Marcus said quietly, "Can I see those documents?" I got them from my filing cabinet. I had kept copies, and I will be grateful for that small habit for the rest of my life. Marcus sat at my kitchen table for 45 minutes reading in complete silence. I stood at the counter and made tea I forgot to drink and watched his face. When he looked up, he said, "Ruth, do you know who you gave your durable power of attorney to?" I said, "Daniel, my son." He turned the page toward me and pointed to a line near the bottom. The documents named Cassandra as the primary power of attorney holder. Daniel was listed second. In the event that Daniel was unavailable or unwilling, Cassandra had full authority to make financial and medical decisions on my behalf. I sat there and stared at that line for a long time. I had signed those papers. I had held the pen. I had listened to Daniel describe each document as he slid it across the table, and I had trusted him absolutely, and I had signed what I believed was a document naming my son as my legal advocate. But the name on the primary line was hers. Marcus was already writing on his legal pad. He said, "I want you to hear this clearly. These can be challenged if there was misrepresentation involved. But Ruth, from this moment forward, I need you to not sign anything, and I need you to go through every document in this house." He left me with his cell number and a specific list of what to look for. I started looking that same afternoon. For the next 2 weeks, I went through every drawer, every folder, every filing cabinet in my house. I wasn't entirely sure what I was searching for. I only knew that something was wrong and I needed to understand the full shape of it. Most of what I found was ordinary: old tax returns, Gerald's pension paperwork, the deed to the house, still solely in my name, a relief so strong I had to sit down for a moment. Bank statements, car insurance, nothing unusual. And then, at the very back of the bottom drawer of my home office desk, tucked inside a plain manila folder that I did not remember creating, I found a document I had never seen before. It was 7 pages long. At the top, it read, Placement and Care Coordination Agreement. The parties listed were Hearthstone Senior Care Group, LLC, Cassandra Maeve Whitfield, and Daniel Arthur Whitfield. The date on the agreement was November 14th. 6 months before Daniel sat at my kitchen table with tears in his eyes and told me it was time to think about options. 6 months before. I sat down on the floor of my home office. I didn't even make it to a chair, with that document in my hands, and I read every single word. The agreement outlined a care coordination arrangement in which Cassandra would facilitate the voluntary placement of a designated individual, I was referred to throughout as the care recipient, into Hearthstone's facilities. In exchange for what the contract called referral and transition services, Cassandra would receive a facilitation fee of $22,000 upon successful placement. The contract also outlined a preferred estate liquidation partnership with a company called Meridian Property Solutions, described as Hearthstone's preferred vendor, who would manage the sale of the care recipient's property and split a percentage of the proceeds between Hearthstone and what the document called the referring party. The referring party was Cassandra. There was more: a separate addendum, 1 page, initialed but not fully signed by Daniel, describing something called a voluntary asset transfer agreement that could be executed once, and I'm quoting directly, proper medical authorizations were in place. The medical authorizations, the power of attorney she already had. Daniel had initialed that addendum. I don't know, even now, exactly what he understood about what he was initialing. Part of me still doesn't want to know, but he had done it. His handwriting was on the page. What I understood in that moment was this: Cassandra had made a formal deal with a company to place me in a nursing home, sell my house through their affiliated vendor, and collect a fee for delivering me, before she ever expressed a word of concern about my health, before she ever looked me in the eye and asked how I was sleeping, before she mailed me that brochure. All of it had already been arranged. I have to stop here for just a second. If you were in my position and you found that contract, on the floor of your own home office, in a folder you didn't remember putting there, what would you have done next? Would you have called your son right then? Would you have gone straight to the police? Leave your answer in the comments, because the choice I made in the next few hours almost derailed everything, and I came very close to making a completely different, and catastrophically worse, decision. My first instinct was to call Daniel immediately, to read him every word of that contract over the phone, to demand, with everything I had, to know what he was thinking and who he had become. Every cell in my body wanted to do that. But I heard Patricia's voice in my head. Think about it practically. If I called Daniel, I was calling Cassandra. Whatever he knew or didn't know, if I tipped my hand before I understood the full picture, that contract would disappear. Those documents would be shredded and gone, and without proof, I was just a confused older woman making accusations against her own family. I called Marcus instead. He was at my house within 2 hours. He read the contract twice, slowly, all 7 pages both times. He photographed every page with his phone. Then he sat back and looked at me and said, "Ruth, this is potentially elder financial fraud. What they've built here, the power of attorney, the nursing home arrangement, the estate liquidation deal, this is a coordinated scheme, not a misunderstanding." I asked him whether Daniel was a criminal. He chose his words carefully. He said, "I don't yet know what Daniel understood and when he understood it. But someone in this arrangement knew exactly what they were doing." He told me I needed 2 things immediately: a certified elder law attorney and a private investigator. The attorney to address the power of attorney documents, the PI to understand the full scope, because Marcus was already certain we weren't seeing the complete picture. He said, "Ruth, a woman who builds this kind of arrangement doesn't do it for a $22,000 referral fee. That's not the real prize here." I asked him what the real prize was. He said, "Your house is worth over $600,000. The goal was to get it sold through Hearthstone's preferred vendor, almost certainly at a deflated price, with fees attached that no independent realtor would charge. Between the placement fee, the estate liquidation cut, and whatever Cassandra had arranged privately, you're looking at a potential six-figure scheme. Possibly significantly more." I did not sleep that night. Marcus connected me with an elder law attorney named Beverly. Sharp, methodical, mid-50s, with 15 years of experience in exactly these kinds of cases. She called it predatory placement fraud, a scheme in which a family member, in coordination with a care facility, moves an elderly relative, uses their assets to cover care costs, and then liquidates their estate through affiliated vendors under the umbrella of legal authority they had quietly acquired. "The power of attorney is the engine of the whole thing," Beverly told me. "Once that's in place and you're inside that facility, the person holding that authority controls your financial life. That's why it had to be Cassandra's name on the primary line, not Daniel's." She filed legal paperwork that same week to challenge the validity of the power of attorney on the grounds of misrepresentation. She also advised me, very deliberately, very directly, not to say a single word to Daniel until further notice. "We need to understand what he knew," she said. "Because if he was a knowing participant, we need documentation before he has any opportunity to revise his story." That was one of the hardest things anyone asked me to do during this entire experience. Saying nothing to my son, talking to him on the phone and sounding normal. Texting back as though everything was fine, all while building a case that included his name. Meanwhile, Marcus had connected with a private investigator named Ray, 12 years of financial fraud investigation before going private. Ray didn't say much at our first meeting. He gave me 3 days and asked me to write down every conversation, every name, every document, and every date I could remember. I wrote 18 pages. While Ray worked his end of the investigation, my job was to keep my daily life looking completely undisturbed. I had to take Cassie's calls. I had to respond to Daniel's texts. I had to receive the brochures she continued sending and say they were helpful. I had to act as though nothing had changed. That was the hardest kind of work I have ever done in my life. Harder than anything I can describe to you. Because every time Cassie called with her smooth, practiced warmth and asked how I was feeling, I was holding the image of 7 pages with her name on them and smiling into the phone. Ray came back to me 10 days later. He sat at my kitchen table, this table, and opened a folder and laid out what he had found. Cassandra had worked in property management before she met Daniel. Before that, she had been briefly employed by a company called Senior Transitions Group. After some digging, Ray had discovered that Senior Transitions Group was a predecessor organization to Hearthstone Senior Care Group. Same primary investors, different name. It had been rebranded after a complaint filed with the Ohio Department of Health 3 years earlier. She hadn't found Hearthstone. She had a prior relationship with the organization going back years. That was the first thing. The second, Meridian Property Solutions, the preferred estate vendor named in the contract, was registered in Ohio. One of its 3 listed business principals was a man named Gary Solt. Ray had traced Gary Solt back through public social media records. Gary Solt had been a groomsman at Cassandra's sister's wedding 4 years earlier. His face appeared in tagged photos alongside Cassandra. This wasn't a vendor she had researched independently. This was a network of people she already knew. A web that had been constructed long before she ever met my son. And Daniel. Ray had found something about Daniel that Beverly needed to know about immediately. Several months before our discovery, Daniel had opened a new joint investment account with Cassandra. He had also refinanced their home mortgage, pulling significant equity. The timing of both transactions aligned almost exactly with the date the contract had been signed. Whether Daniel had understood what he was involved in, he had financially benefited from an arrangement tied to defrauding his mother. I asked Ray directly, "Do you believe my son knew what he was part of?" Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I think he knew enough to be uncomfortable asking questions. Whether he understood the full structure, that I can't tell you. I held that answer like something fragile for a very long time. Beverly brought the complete file, the contract, the power of attorney documents, Ray's investigative report, and her own legal analysis, to an elder abuse investigator at the Ohio Attorney General's office, a woman named Detective Holloway. We sat with her for 2 hours. She asked me questions without expression. She took everything. Before she left, she said one thing I have never forgotten. She said, Mrs. Whitfield, the people who design these schemes count on the family member being too heartbroken, too confused, or too afraid to fight back. The fact that you found that contract and you are sitting in this room right now, that changes everything. I nodded and didn't say anything, but something shifted in my chest in that moment. The fear that had been living there for months started, just slightly, to loosen its grip. 2 weeks later, Beverly called me with something that made everything larger than I had imagined. The AG's office had identified 2 additional individuals who appeared to have been targeted by what investigators were now calling a potential organized elder fraud ring. Both were widowed homeowners. Both had been successfully placed in Hearthstone. Both had estates that were subsequently managed through Meridian Property Solutions after placement. I was not the first person this had been done to. I may have been the first person to find the contract. Beverly set up a meeting. She called it a family discussion about estate planning, framed as neutral mediation, presented to Daniel and Cassie as a routine consultation with an elder law specialist. Professional, calm, harmless. Daniel called me the night before to confirm. He sounded cautious. He asked if everything was okay. I told him I just wanted to make sure I had my affairs in order. He said that sounded like a good idea. I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a long time, looking at the window over the sink, the one that looks out into the backyard where Daniel used to play as a little boy. I want to tell you I felt strong driving to Beverly's office that morning. I want to tell you I was ready. But the honest truth is, the dominant feeling was grief. Not rage, grief. Because regardless of how this day went, the fact that I was walking into an attorney's office to confront my son and daughter-in-law with evidence of what they had tried to do to me, that was a wound I was already living with. The kind that doesn't close cleanly no matter how the story ends. They arrived together. Cassie was wearing a light blue blazer. She shook Beverly's hand with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel looked pale. Beverly opened the meeting calmly. Estate planning. General overview. Questions about my financial situation in broad terms. She asked Daniel and Cassie what their understanding was of my current legal documents. Cassie did most of the talking. She said they had made sure everything was in order. She mentioned she had helped coordinate the paperwork. Her voice had that quality I knew so well. Warm, measured, utterly in control. Beverly nodded, said she appreciated that. Then she said, I'd like to show you all something. She placed the placement and care coordination agreement flat on the table. I watched Cassandra's face. She looked down at that document and there was a pause. Half a second, maybe less, where something moved behind her eyes. Something shifted and was quickly covered. She recovered her composure almost immediately, but I had been watching for it. I saw it. She said, I'm not sure what you think that is, but... Beverly said, it's a placement and care coordination agreement between Hearthstone Senior Care Group, Cassandra Whitfield, and Daniel Whitfield, dated November 14th of last year. It outlines a $22,000 facilitation fee payable to Cassandra upon Ruth's placement, and a preferred estate liquidation arrangement with Meridian Property Solutions. She placed Ray's investigative report on the table, then copies of the altered power of attorney documents, then the addendum with Daniel's initials. Daniel stared at the papers. He was completely still. Cassie said, her voice still controlled, still smooth, this is completely out of context. This was an exploratory document. This was, Daniel said quietly, what is Meridian Property Solutions? That was the first thing he said. Not to Beverly, not to me, to Cassie, directly to Cassie. She turned to him and said, Daniel, let's not. He said it again, louder. Cassie, what is Meridian Property Solutions? It was not a question the second time. She stopped talking. Beverly told him. She told him about Gary Solt, the sister's wedding, the photographs, the prior employment at Senior Transitions Group, Hearthstone's predecessor organization, the two other individuals who had already been placed through the same arrangement and whose estates were currently under review. I watched my son's face move through several different expressions in the space of about 30 seconds. Confusion, comprehension, something that looked like physical pain working its way from the inside out. He said, "She told me the documents were standard. She said the financial advisor recommended them. She handed them to me and told me what to sign." Cassie said, "Daniel." He said, "Don't." The quietest word I have ever heard him say. What came out of that meeting, and the weeks that followed, was this. Daniel had been shown fragments of the arrangement, not the full picture. He had signed documents without reading them, because Cassie had mastered the art of making scrutiny feel like an accusation. He had not known about the referral fee. He had not fully understood the power of attorney structure. He had known Cassie had connections in the senior care industry, and he had accepted her framing of everything as careful, forward-thinking planning. Was he guilty of something? Yes. Of willful blindness, at minimum. Of choosing comfort over clarity. Of not asking the questions a better version of himself would have asked. But Beverly's assessment, and ultimately the Attorney General's, was that Cassandra was the architect of this scheme, and that Daniel had been manipulated alongside me. Just from a different position. The investigation that followed focused on Cassandra, on Hearthstone Senior Care Group, and on Meridian Property Solutions. The case expanded over the following 4 months. 2 other families came forward after the AG's office made the investigation public. A 3rd family was identified through Hearthstone's subpoenaed records. The pattern was consistent across all cases. Widowed homeowners, family member as an inside facilitator, power of attorney quietly transferred, placement arranged through the Hearthstone referral system, estate subsequently managed through Meridian Property Solutions. Cassandra was charged with elder financial exploitation under Ohio law, a felony, along with fraud and conspiracy charges tied to the broader scheme. The charges carried the potential for significant prison time. Hearthstone Senior Care Group had its operating license placed under review by the Ohio Department of Health. Their principal investors were named in civil litigation. Meridian Property Solutions became the subject of a separate financial fraud investigation. The power of attorney Cassandra had embedded her name into was formally invalidated by the court. Beverly filed suit for the recovery of my legal fees and investigative costs. Both were awarded. The 81-year-old man and the 74-year-old woman who had already been placed through the Hearthstone arrangement were provided with legal advocates and assistance in relocating to facilities of their own choosing. Recovery of misappropriated estate assets was ongoing. Cassandra and Daniel separated within 6 weeks of the meeting in Beverly's office. Their divorce was finalized the following spring. I will not pretend that Daniel and I returned immediately to what we once were. That would be dishonest, and I promised this story would be true. There were conversations between us that were long and painful and necessary. There were months when I honestly could not tell you whether we would find our way back to each other. He had not been the villain of the story. But he had not been the son I raised either. Not for a while. Not when it counted. We did find our way back. Slowly, imperfectly. The way real reconciliation actually works. Not in one conversation. Not in a single tearful moment. But in dozens of ordinary Sundays over the course of a year and a half. I still live in my house. The same colonial, on the same quiet street outside of Columbus. The kitchen table is still here. I've had it for 30 years and I intend to keep it for 30 more. Patricia and I have coffee most Sunday mornings now. Marcus and Beverly are both people I consider friends in a way that's hard to explain. The kind of connection that forms when you go through something difficult together and come out on the other side. Daniel came over for Christmas this past year. He brought food and stayed for 4 hours, and we watched old movies and let the evening just be ordinary. That ordinariness felt like a gift neither of us mentioned out loud. Maybe some things are better that way. I want to be careful about what I take from this experience, because I have no interest in offering a tidy lesson where a complicated thing lived. What I'll say is this: There is a particular kind of danger that comes dressed in concern, in careful language, in the voice of someone who tells you they only want what's best for you. I spent too many years assuming that feeling cared for meant being safe. I know the difference now. The contract that changed everything was sitting in a folder at the back of a drawer in my own home, in a room I walked into every single day. Cassandra had put it there, I believe, because she never imagined I would read it carefully, because she had spent years building a version of me in her mind, a woman who trusted the people around her, who signed what was handed to her, who was too grateful for the attention to ask questions. She was right about most of that. But she underestimated one thing. She underestimated that a woman who spent 31 years as a school librarian knows, better than almost anyone, that the most important thing you can ever do is read the whole document. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, thank you. Genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. This took a long time to be ready to talk about. And knowing that someone out there listened to every minute of it means more than I can really express. If this story reached you in any way, if it reminded you of something in your own life, if it made you think of someone you love, if it made you angry or sad or relieved, please leave a comment below. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love for you to. There are more stories here. Stories about family, about trust, about the moments that quietly change everything. I'll be here to share them. Take care of yourselves. Read everything carefully. And trust your instincts when something doesn't sit right with you. Because sometimes the most important thing you'll ever find is the thing you were never supposed to look for.